My parents used my college savings to renovate their home for my sister's wedding, and now they expect me to take out student loans. I'm Jordan, and recently I feel like no one around me truly understands what I'm going through. I always thought my parents were my biggest supporters, so the news they just shared has left me reeling. I'm 18, on the verge of graduating high school, and I've always been good at managing my money. Since I was 14, I worked weekends at a local diner, then at a retail store, just to save up for college. My parents had always promised to match what I saved, saying we were a college-bound family. They emphasized values like hard work, ambition, and commitment to achieving goals. At least, that's what I believed. I thought everything was set. I got accepted to my dream school and was mentally ready for the challenge, late study nights, long hours, and whatever else college life might bring. The last thing I expected was to find out that years of scrimping and saving could have been for nothing. It all started a few weeks ago when I overheard my mom, Karen, on the phone with a friend, excitedly talking about recent home renovations. They'd added a new deck, redone the landscaping, built a custom gazebo for photos. The whole place had been transformed. I hadn't even known they were doing any of this, let alone the reason behind it. When I later asked my mom, she just brushed it off, saying it was all for Brielle's big day. My sister, Brielle, is 24 and getting married next month. We've never been especially close. To be honest, she's the family favorite. My parents always seem to believe she can do no wrong. She got a new car for her 21st birthday, while I'm still saving up for a used one. But whatever. That's how it's always been, and I've come to accept it. Yet, this renovation talk unsettled me. I hadn't realized my parents were flush enough to make such major changes, so I started worrying. I had saved up about $20,000 for college, and with their promised match, that would nearly cover my costs. But something didn't sit right. The next day, I sat my parents down and directly asked if my college fund was safe. They exchanged a hesitant glance before my dad, Marcus, finally said, "Look, Jordan, things came up and we had to make decisions for the good of the whole family." When he said the whole family, I didn't understand until my mom chimed in, explaining they had used a large part of my college savings for Brielle's wedding renovations. Hearing that, I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. All I could manage to say was, "You spent my college fund on the wedding." They just nodded, as if this were perfectly reasonable. My dad tried to justify it, saying that weddings were a priority in our family, a tradition. He argued that college could be funded with loans, but weddings are a once-in-a-lifetime event. According to him, it was my responsibility as family to understand and accept this. That's when it hit me. They expected me to take out loans, as if it were no big deal. Loans I'd be repaying for who knows how long, just because they thought turning our home into a wedding paradise was more important. I couldn't stay calm. I asked if they had even considered my future or what all those years of saving meant to me. My mom looked at me and said, "Jordan, don't be so dramatic. Your sister deserves a beautiful wedding, and you'll understand that when you're older." Dramatic? This was my college fund they spent. It wasn't a gift from them. I had worked hard for that money, and they'd promised to match it. Now they were treating my dreams like they didn't matter. Meanwhile, Brielle seemed either oblivious or indifferent to what was going on. Over the next few days, I tried to talk to my parents again, hoping they'd see how unfair this was. But each time they gave the same response. Family comes first, and I should be happy for my sister. They even suggested I could live at home and attend a local community college to save money, as if they'd already mapped out my future with no regard for my plans. Feeling cornered, like I had no control over my life, I reached out to my best friend Aiden for advice. He was shocked and suggested I might have legal options, but that would mean standing up to my parents, something I could hardly stomach. How could they do this and expect me to just accept it? Aiden encouraged me to talk to my Aunt Cheryl, my dad's sister, who's always been the black sheep of the family. She's had her own issues with my parents over the years, so I thought she might understand. Like old Aunt Cheryl, she wasn't surprised at all. In fact, she said this was classic Marcus and Karen behavior. She went on about how they've always been more concerned with appearances and others' opinions than with treating their kids fairly. Apparently, this wasn't the first time they'd pulled something like this. She even hinted that Brielle might have had a say in the renovations, which only made me angrier. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like an outsider in my own family. It's like they only care about Brielle's happiness, and my future is just an afterthought. I still don't know what to do. Part of me wants to fight to get my money back, or maybe even go public with what they've done, but would that make things worse? I never imagined my own family would value one child's wedding over another's education, and now I'm left wondering if I'm being selfish or if they're genuinely in the wrong. After talking to Aunt Cheryl, I felt even more unsettled. It's one thing to feel hurt by your parents. It's another to realize this favoritism and poor decision-making have deep roots in the family. It turns out my parents have always prioritized their image over actually supporting their kids equally. I knew I couldn't let things stand. I needed my parents to understand how betrayed I felt. I had been saving for college for years, and they didn't even tell me they were spending the money. So I approached them again, hoping that just maybe, if I explained my feelings, they'd see things from my perspective. But as soon as I brought it up, my mom sighed, looking like she was already tired of the discussion. "Jordan," my mom said, "you need to understand that weddings mean a lot to us. We want your sister's day to be unforgettable. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event." I almost laughed at that. Once in a lifetime? And what about college? Did they think it was just some casual choice I'd get over? But I held back and tried to stay calm. "So my future matters less than Belle's one day?" I asked. My dad gave me a look of disappointment. "Jordan, college is something you can fund in various ways. Student loans are common, and you can handle them, but weddings, well, they've always been a priority for our family." I replied that it was far from normal to take someone's college savings without even talking to them about it, but my mom just waved her hand dismissively, saying, "It's not like you're losing out on college, you're just adjusting your expectations." Adjusting my expectations? That's what they wanted me to do. Oh, they wanted me to accept that all my hard work wasn't a priority to them, that they'd rather pour money into a backyard makeover for a wedding than see me attend the school I'd worked so hard to get into. I'd had enough. So I left, feeling more frustrated than ever. After that conversation, I started distancing myself from family dinners and gatherings. Most nights I'd head over to Aiden's house instead. Aiden's been my best friend since middle school, and his family practically adopted me. When I told them what my parents had done, Aiden's mom was shocked and even suggested I see a financial advisor to explore alternative ways to pay for college. But deep down, I didn't want loans. I wanted what I had earned and saved. I wanted what was supposed to be mine. Aiden then came up with an idea that surprised me. "Jordan, you could take them to small claims court. They can't just take your money without telling you." The thought of taking legal action against my own parents was terrifying. Could I really do that? They're my family, and despite everything, I didn't want to destroy what little relationship we had left. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself now, I'd be letting them walk all over me for the rest of my life. A few days later, Belle texted me asking if we could talk. I figured our parents had told her I was upset about the college fund, so I agreed to meet her, hoping she'd understand my perspective. When I got to her place, she initially seemed sympathetic, saying she understood why I was upset. But then she shifted to justifying the situation. "Jordan, I didn't ask them to use your college money, but they wanted me to have a perfect wedding. Mom and Dad just thought it was the right thing to do. Weddings are really important to them." I wanted to believe she hadn't played a role in it, but Aunt Cheryl's words echoed in my mind. Belle had always been the golden child. I remembered her graduation party. It was a huge celebration with everything she'd wanted, while mine had barely been acknowledged. It wasn't hard to imagine her letting this happen. even if she hadn't directly requested it. When I pointed out how their choice was impacting my future, Belle seemed annoyed. "Jordan, don't make this all about you. I get that college is important, but you're not the only one who has to make sacrifices." Sacrifices? This wasn't just a minor setback. They'd taken away something I'd spent years working toward. I was hurt, but I'd tried one last time to make her understand. I told her how much college meant to me, how I'd been saving and working for so long, and how their decision had completely blindsided me. But all she said was, "It's just money, Jordan. You can pay it back. Just money." That's when I realized she'd never understand. Belle was getting the wedding of her dreams and had everything handed to her. She didn't know what it was like to work for something and then have it taken away. She'd always been my parents' favorite, and now she was part of the reason my own dreams were slipping away. I left her place feeling defeated. It seemed like no one in my family cared about how deeply this decision affected me. They expected me to just let it go because it was for Brielle's wedding, as if that somehow made it acceptable. As the wedding day approached, my parents kept urging me to let go of my resentment. They even suggested I give a toast at the wedding to show family unity. The thought of standing up there pretending to be happy made me sick, but my dad told me it was my duty as her brother. At this point, it wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about respect. I realized my parents didn't view me as an equal part of the family. I was just the kid they expected to comply with their decisions while they used my future for their own purposes. One evening, sensing the tension, my dad pulled me aside. He said he and my mom had come up with a compromise. For a moment, I thought they might actually be reconsidering, but then he explained their solution. "We're willing to give you a small amount each year, Jordan. Enough to cover basic tuition if you go to an in-state school, but the rest of your expenses will be up to you." I was stunned. That was their compromise? After all my years of saving and hard work, they were offering me just a fraction of what I'd counted on. It felt like an insult. At that moment, I knew that if I wanted to attend my dream school, I'd have to do it entirely on my own. I no longer wanted to depend on them for anything. I couldn't trust them to keep their promises, and I wasn't willing to be under their control anymore. I thanked them but declined their offer, saying, "I'll figure it out myself." The look of shock on their faces showed they hadn't expected that response. My mom started protesting, saying I was being dramatic, but I was done listening. This was my life, and I was finally ready to take charge of it. After that conversation, I began making concrete plans to pay for college without their support. Maybe it would mean working even harder, taking on some loans, or making sacrifices, but at least it would be on my terms. As for Brielle's wedding, I didn't know if I could even bring myself to attend, let alone give a toast. This was the turning point, when I decided I wouldn't let my family dictate my future anymore. From that last conversation, the distance between my parents and me only grew. I had officially rejected their compromise, and my refusal to accept their half-hearted offer made them even more distant. They seemed to think I should be grateful for anything they gave me after they'd spent my college fund, but I wasn't going to let them rewrite my future for the sake of Brielle's wedding. With the wedding just weeks away, they began dropping hints about my attitude, seeming annoyed that I wasn't joining in the family excitement. Every conversation with them felt like just another attempt to guilt-trip me. "It's your sister's special day. Family is more important than money. And, my favorite, when are you going to get over this?" The answer? Not anytime soon. One evening, my dad called a family dinner, saying we needed to clear the air. I wasn't excited about it, but I figured if I was going to get through to them, this might be my chance. When I arrived, the table was set, and my parents looked like they'd rehearsed a speech. Brielle was there too, looking like she was ready for a confrontation. As soon as we sat down, my dad launched into a monologue about family values and the sacrifices we make for loved ones. It was the same speech they'd been giving for weeks. I tried to stay calm, but the frustration was boiling over. Then he turned to me with a disappointed look. Jordan, we know you're hurt, but you're making this harder on yourself. Your sister is getting married, and you're acting like money matters more than family. No, that was it. I couldn't hold back any longer. I told them flat out that they'd used my college fund without even asking me. And now they were acting like I was selfish for wanting to keep the money I'd worked hard for. You say family's important, I said, looking directly at my dad, but apparently that only applies to Brielle. At that, Brielle finally spoke up. Jordan, are you really going to ruin my wedding over this? Mom and Dad are offering you a way to go to college, but you're acting like it's not good enough. Do you even realize what you're doing to this family? The whole ruining her wedding comment hit a nerve. They couldn't understand that this wasn't about the wedding itself. It was about what they'd taken from me to make it happen. I'm not ruining your wedding, Brielle, I replied. You, Mom, and Dad made that choice when you decided to spend my college fund on your big day. My mom looked horrified. Jordan, that's enough. Brielle is your sister. You should want her wedding to be as beautiful as possible. I couldn't believe it. They were acting like my entire life should be put on hold for Brielle's wedding. How is this supposed to be normal? Then, to my surprise, Brielle's fiancé, Noah, who'd been silent the whole time, cleared his throat and spoke up. I know it's not my place, he said, looking uncomfortable, but honestly, I think Jordan has a point. College is a big deal. Maybe there's another way to handle the wedding that doesn't mess with his future. You could have heard a pin drop. Brielle stared at Noah like he'd just betrayed her, and my parents looked like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. But his words made me feel validated, like maybe I wasn't completely crazy for feeling this way. Of course, Brielle wasn't having it. She turned to Noah, fuming. You're supposed to be on my side. We've been planning this for a year. Jordan's just being petty and dramatic. My dad quickly tried to take back control of the conversation. Let's not get distracted, he said, giving Noah a look of warning. Jordan, this isn't the time to hold grudges. You need to look at the bigger picture. This wedding is bringing our family together, and we need you to support us. Their idea of support sounded more like do exactly what we say. I felt like a puppet they wanted to manipulate, and I was done letting them pull the strings. I took a deep breath and said, I am thinking about the bigger picture, and right now, that's my future. I've worked too hard to just let it go because you think weddings matter more than an education. At this point, the family dinner was crumbling. Brielle stormed out, my mom was on the verge of tears, and my dad just sat there, shaking his head like he couldn't believe I was standing up for myself. After a long pause, he finally said, If you're so set on going your own way, maybe you need to learn how to get by without relying on us. I knew he was trying to intimidate me, to make me doubt my choice, but all it did was confirm I was making the right decision. If they wanted me to rely on them less, then fine. I'd go it alone even if it meant working twice as hard. In the days that followed, things were even more strained. My parents avoided me, and Brielle sent a stream of messages accusing me of being selfish, but I didn't respond. I was focused on finding a way to fund my education without them. One night, Aiden came over with a stack of scholarship applications and information on grants. He offered to help fill them out and said he'd ask his parents if they knew of any other financial aid options. It was a small lifeline in what felt like a hopeless situation, but it made a difference. The next family gathering was supposed to be the final wedding rehearsal, and everyone was expected to attend. My parents hadn't explicitly told me I had to go, but it was heavily implied. When the day came, I really didn't want to show up, but I went anyway, mostly out of curiosity. When I arrived, it was clear that Brielle and my parents were still angry. They kept throwing me pointed looks, and Brielle even muttered loudly, "Nice of you to finally show up." I ignored her, but as the night went on, my resentment started bubbling up again. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to pose for photos pretending everything was fine, and I definitely didn't want to give a phony toast about family unity at the reception. Near the end of the evening, I pulled my dad aside and told him straight up that I wouldn't be giving a toast at the wedding. I wasn't about to stand up there and lie about how happy I was for them, and I didn't want to take part in this charade. He looked at me, his face red with anger, and said, "Jordan, if you don't participate in this wedding, don't expect any help from us for college or anything else." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were actually using money to try to control me, threatening to cut me off if I didn't fall in line. "Well, I guess that settles it then," I told him. "I'll figure out how to pay for college myself." I walked out of that rehearsal with mixed feelings. A mix of relief that I was finally standing up for myself and sadness over how fractured my relationship with my family had become. I knew there was no going back. I'd made my choice, and now I had to find a way to make it work. As I left, I noticed Noah standing off to the side. He gave me a quick nod, as if he understood, but we didn't speak. I didn't know if he'd still feel the same way after Brielle told him her side of the story. That night, I went home and applied for every scholarship, grant, and aid program I could find. It was late, but Aiden was right there beside me, looking up deadlines and helping me brainstorm essay ideas. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a real chance, like I might actually be able to pull this off on my own. Now, with the wedding only a week away, I've made a decision. I'm not going. I don't care what they think anymore. They made their choices and I'm making mine. This is my life and I'm done letting them control it. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe they'll finally realize how much they've hurt me, or maybe they'll cut me off completely. Either way, I'm ready for whatever comes next. I'd rather face an uncertain future than keep pretending everything's okay. This could be the end of my relationship with my family as I know it, but for the first time, I feel like I'm finally standing up for myself. In the days leading up to the wedding, I felt an odd calm, almost as if I were detached from the chaos around me. My parents, of course, had no idea I didn't plan to attend. I figured they'd find out soon enough. I had made my choice, and although part of me was sad about what it meant for my relationship with them, another part felt free. The night before the wedding, Belle texted me, asking to meet just the two of us. I nearly ignored it, but curiosity got the best of me. Maybe she had finally understood what this had done to me, or perhaps she wanted one last chance to lecture me. When I arrived at the cafe, she was already there, looking stressed as she sipped her latte, her nail polish chipped. A strange detail, considering how much she usually cares about her appearance. She didn't look like someone on the brink of a perfect day. I prepared myself, expecting some kind of guilt trip or lecture. Instead, she began, "Look, Jordan, I know we've had our issues, but tomorrow is the biggest day of my life, and it really matters to me that you're there." There it was. She wanted me there, playing along, pretending everything was fine so her day could go off without a hitch. I was about to explain why I wasn't planning to show up when she said something that caught me off guard. "I didn't know Mom and Dad used your college fund," she admitted, looking down. "I thought they were paying for everything themselves. I only found out yesterday, and I'm really sorry." For a moment, I was speechless. I'd always assumed she knew all along, especially since she's so close to Mom, and they seem to plan everything together. But Brielle's tone was sincere, with an awkwardness I hadn't seen before. Maybe she really didn't know. "Brielle, I worked for years to save that money," I told her honestly. "They promised to match it, and then they just pick it up, and then they just feed it to them." She nodded, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. "I get it. I mean, I can't fully understand what it feels like, but I see why you're hurt. And I know you won't want to hear this, but Mom and Dad genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. They think weddings are, I don't know, sacred or something." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Sacred? More sacred than my education?" She shook her head. "No, but they just have this thing about family traditions. They want everything to look perfect for everyone else." And that was the real problem, wasn't it? They were so fixated on appearances, on portraying the perfect family, that they couldn't see the damage they were causing. I wasn't sure if I could ever see them the same way again. Brielle reached across the table and put her hand on mine. I'm not asking you to forgive them or pretend everything's fine, but it would mean a lot to me if you were there tomorrow, even if you hate every minute of it. I want my brother there, and I want to find a way to make this up to you." I studied her, trying to see if she was serious. Brielle had never been one to apologize, let alone make amends, but something felt different, as if she were finally seeing my side. Maybe this whole situation had made her grow up a little too. "I don't know, Brielle," I said, pulling my hand back. "This whole thing has messed with me in ways you can't understand. I don't want to stand there and pretend like I'm okay with it." She nodded, wiping a tear. "I know, but maybe if you're there, it'll be easier to start mending things." There was a long silence. Part of me wanted to stay resolute, to stick to my plan of not showing up and make my statement, but another part of me, a softer part I didn't realize I still had, wanted to believe her. Finally, I agreed. "Fine, Brielle, I'll be there. But don't expect me to act like this is okay." She let out a sigh of relief, offering a small smile. "Thank you, Jordan. I promise I'll find a way to make this right." The next morning, as I got ready, I felt a strange mix of dread and resignation. I was going to the wedding, but I wasn't doing it for my parents. I was doing it for Brielle. And maybe for myself, too. If I stayed away, I knew it would haunt me. Maybe this was a way to get closure, or at least begin finding some. When I arrived at the ceremony, I kept my distance, steering clear of my parents as much as possible. Brielle noticed me and gave a grateful nod, which was all the acknowledgement I needed. I stood at the back, watching everything like I was an outsider, a spectator in my own family. Then came the reception. I had planned to skip it, but before I could leave, Brielle found me and practically pulled me into a quiet corner. "Listen, I talked to Noah," she said, glancing over at her husband, who was chatting with family. "He knows everything now, and he's mad at Mom and Dad. He actually suggested that maybe we could help you out." I raised an eyebrow. "Help me out?" She nodded. "Wuck, I don't know if you'd want this, but Noah and I talked, and we'd be willing to cover the amount Mom and Dad took. We can give it to you as a loan or whatever works. You wouldn't need to pay us back right away. We just want you to have the chance to go to the college you worked so hard for." I was stunned. After everything, I hadn't expected this. Brielle had always been the one who took everything our parents handed her without question. But here she was, offering to undo some of the damage they'd caused. I didn't know what to say. "Are you serious?" I asked, still trying to absorb it all. She nodded, her expression sincere. "Yes. Noah thinks it's the least we can do. I know it doesn't make up for everything, but I want to try." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to turn it down outright, insisting this was my parents' responsibility. But another part of me couldn't ignore that this was the closest anyone in my family had come to truly helping me, and the gesture was significant, especially from Brielle. After a long pause, I finally said, "Okay, I'll think about it." She smiled, and for a moment I glimpsed a side of my sister I hadn't seen before, someone who genuinely wanted to make things right. She hugged me, and though it felt a bit awkward and stiff, it was a start. I stayed for the rest of the reception, mostly keeping to myself but observing my family. My parents were laughing and mingling with guests, probably feeling like they'd pulled off the perfect wedding. I didn't know if they were aware of Brielle's offer or if she'd kept it to herself, but either way, it felt like a small victory that I'd gotten through the day on my terms. After the wedding, I took a few days to seriously consider Brielle's offer. I didn't want to accept it out of desperation, but I couldn't deny that it would help me get closer to achieving my goals. Noah even reached out to discuss everything, assuring me it wasn't out of pity or obligation. He genuinely wanted to help. Ultimately, I accepted their offer, agreeing to repay them when I could. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was better than sinking under a mountain of loans. For the first time in weeks, I felt like college might actually be possible without bearing the burden of my parents' decisions. Things with my family remained complicated. My parents still didn't know about the arrangement, and I wasn't sure how they'd react once they found out. Part of me didn't care. I'd learned the hard way that I couldn't count on them to support me the way I'd hoped. Still, a small part of me wished this would be a wake-up call. That they'd see the need to value my future as much as they had Brielle's wedding. I wasn't sure if I'd ever completely forgive them, but at least now I had a way forward that felt like my own. After the wedding, things felt strangely surreal. Brielle and Noah's offer to cover the amount my parents had used on the wedding renovations brought relief, but also stirred up mixed emotions. I was grateful, especially since Brielle had always felt more like a distant relative than a sister. Yet, part of me was saddened that it had come to this, that my sister and her husband were stepping in to support me while my own parents remained oblivious to the harm they'd caused. It didn't take long for them to find out about the arrangement, though. I'd been avoiding a confrontation, but Brielle must have told them, as one evening they called me in for another family talk. My mom wasted no time before starting in. "Jordan, I can't believe you went behind our backs taking money from your sister and her husband." I looked at her, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Mom, they offered to help. I didn't ask them to, but it's my future we're talking about, and you already showed that the wedding was your priority." My dad's expression grew angrier. "Jordan, this is a betrayal of family trust. We offered you a compromise, and you threw it back in our faces. Now you're turning Brielle against us, making her feel guilty for something that was never her fault." It felt absurd, like they still saw themselves as the ones wronged. "You took my college fund without even talking to me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You act like this is about loyalty, but it's about respect. You didn't respect me, or the years I spent working for that money." They fell silent, my mom looking uncomfortable, as if she couldn't believe I was standing up to them so openly. After a moment, she sighed. "We did what we thought was best, Jordan. Family sacrifices aren't easy, but that's what makes us strong." But I couldn't see it that way. They kept using family to justify decisions that had consistently sacrificed my needs for Brielle's wants. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," I said quietly. "I've spent so long trying to be the good son, to do everything right. But you still don't see me. You don't understand what you took from me." My dad's face tightened with frustration as he stood up. "You're being dramatic. You don't understand what it's like to be a parent and to have to make hard choices for the family." I looked at him, feeling both sadness and resolve. "Maybe you're right, Dad. Maybe I don't understand. But I do know one thing. I can't keep bending over backward to meet your expectations when you won't even consider mine." I walked out of the room, knowing there was nothing left to say. This wasn't a conversation that would end with hugs and reconciliation. They weren't going to see my side, and I was done trying to make them understand. After that night, I focused solely on preparing for college. I worked extra shifts, applied for every scholarship I could find, and stayed close to Brielle and Noah, who kept their word about helping me. Surprisingly, we'd grown closer since the wedding. Brielle even apologized again, admitting she hadn't realized just how much she'd benefited from our parents' favoritism until it directly impacted me. It felt like we were finally breaking through years of rivalry and resentment. As for my parents, they stayed distant, and I didn't reach out either. It was strange, almost like we were strangers living in the same house. Whenever we crossed paths, tension was palpable, as though each of us was too stubborn to bridge the divide. I didn't know if we'd ever find common ground, but I'd made peace with it. This was about my future, and for once, I was putting myself first. Eventually, I moved out and started my first semester. It wasn't the dream I'd once pictured, but it was a new beginning, and I felt free. My relationship with Brielle and Noah grew stronger. They genuinely checked in on me and cared about how I was doing. Ironically, the sister I'd always seen as my rival had now become my closest family ally. One weekend, Brielle called, saying they were hosting a small family dinner and asking if I'd come. She mentioned that it wouldn't feel right without me. I knew my parents would be there, and I hesitated, worried it would be awkward, but in the end I agreed, hoping that maybe enough time had passed for us to talk civilly. When I arrived that evening, the atmosphere was tense. My parents greeted me politely, almost stiffly, without any warmth, but Brielle and Noah were welcoming, doing their best to make me feel comfortable. Toward the end of the night, my dad pulled me aside, his face serious, but with a softness I hadn't seen before. "Jordan," he started, almost hesitating. "We've had time to think about everything. I know we made choices you didn't agree with, but maybe we could have handled things differently." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was the closest he'd come to acknowledging any fault. I could see the internal struggle, the tug-of-war between pride and regret. While it wasn't the resolution I'd once hoped for, it was enough for now. I nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of closure. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." As I left that evening, I realized that sometimes families don't give the apologies we think we deserve. They might never see the full impact of their choices, and we may never fully forgive, but maybe it's enough to just move forward, to take the lessons and let them guide us. I still don't know what the future holds with my parents, but one thing is certain: I'm done letting them define my worth. I'm building my own life on my own terms, and that's a victory in itself.